You tell yourself solitude is peace. You call it independence, strength, even freedom. But as the silence grows louder, you begin to wonder if what you've been protecting all this time was ever yourself, or just the illusion of being untouched. The mind starts to whisper, if no one sees me, do I still exist? Loneliness isn't always loud. It builds slowly, like frost on glass, thin, transparent, almost beautiful at first. Psychologists describe it as social withdrawal reinforcement. The longer you avoid connection, the safer isolation feels, until safety becomes a cage. Your nervous system adapts to the absence of others. Cortisol spikes when you're near people. Oxytocin fades like an unused language. You begin to interpret every silence as rejection, every gesture as intrusion. The walls you built to feel secure start whispering back to you, teaching you to prefer the echo over the voice. You mistake numbness for calm. But if calm is only what remains after all feeling dies, then what are you actually protecting? Human identity is built through reflection. Each person you meet is a mirror that shapes who you believe you are. When those mirrors vanish, the edges of yourself begin to blur. Psychologists call it social self-schema erosion. Without feedback, the brain loses definition of its own image. You start to speak less, not because you have nothing to say, but because your words have nowhere to land. Over time, you forget the rhythm of dialogue, the pauses, the laughter, the subtle confirmation that you still exist in someone else's perception. You become a room with no windows, or even your thoughts stop echoing back. If the self is only real through recognition, then who are you when no one is looking? The brain's reward circuitry, the nucleus accumbens, the ventral tegmental area, was designed to light up at connection. Every smile, every shared glance releases dopamine, confirming survival through belonging. But when those moments disappear, the circuitry doesn't stop firing. It just starts searching in the dark. You replace people with screens, with scrolling, with imagined versions of conversations that never happen. Yet each substitute rewards less, until even pleasure feels counterfeit. You begin to crave the very isolation that starves you. The psychologists call it social anhedonia, the inability to feel joy from human contact. You call it being fine. But what happens when the brain finally forgets that it was ever meant to feel alive through others? You tell yourself you don't need anyone. You repeat it until it feels like truth. But the mind knows the difference between solitude and abandonment, and that knowledge rots in silence. Cognitive dissonance festers. The belief in independence clashes against the primitive need for belonging. You feel powerful and hollow, at once an empire without citizens. Self-help culture calls it strength, yet psychology names it avoidant coping, the art of managing pain by denying its source. You convince yourself that others are distractions, that intimacy is weakness, that self-sufficiency is enlightenment. But the ache under your skin doesn't listen to philosophy. It only knows absence. If strength means never needing anyone, why does it feel so much like dying slowly? You post, you share, you perform small signals cast into the digital abyss, hoping to be seen without ever being known. Psychologists call this compensatory self-presentation. When real connection is lost, we substitute visibility for intimacy. You craft versions of yourself for strangers, reflections polished until nothing human remains. Every like is a pulse, every comment a breath of borrowed existence. But the more you are seen, the less you are known, and the hollowness deepens beneath the glow of the screen. You begin to crave invisibility, even as you beg for attention. The paradox consumes you quietly, beautifully. When the whole world can see you, yet no one truly looks, are you still real? Your body remembers what your mind denies. The warmth of a shoulder beside yours, the unconscious synchrony of breath and speech, these are written deep into neural pathways. When they vanish, the absence itself becomes a stimulus. The brain replays fragments of old closeness like phantom limbs of affection, tricking you with echoes of a life once lived. Psychologists call it social pain overlap theory. The same regions that process physical pain ignite when we lose connection. Loneliness is not sadness. It's the body screaming for touch in a language the mind forgot to translate. You begin to crave even rejection, just to feel the world push back. If pain and love activate the same circuits, how long before you start confusing them? When no one shares your hours, time unravels. Without external anchors, conversations, appointments, laughter days collapse into indistinguishable loops. Psychologists call it temporal self-discontinuity, when the absence of social rhythm fractures your perception of continuity. You stop measuring life by events and begin measuring it by the intensity of your own thoughts. Morning and night trade places. Meals lose meaning. You exist only in the static hum of your internal monologue. Without witnesses, time becomes elastic, stretching endlessly, then snapping shut without warning. The world moves on, but you remain suspended between seconds, watching it blur past. If time is built from shared moments, what's left when no one lives beside your memories? At first, the voice inside you comforts. It replaces the missing conversations, keeps you company in the silence. But over time, it sharpens. Psychologists call this self-critical rumination, when isolation fuses introspection with hostility. The mind turns inward like a blade, dissecting every flaw, replaying every social misstep until it becomes scripture. You start arguing with yourself, losing every debate. The absence of external correction lets your inner critic grow unchecked, louder, crueler, certain. Soon, it's not a voice, it's a judge. You learn to flinch at your own thoughts. You are both prisoner and warden, locked in a loop of self-analysis that masquerades as insight. If your only dialogue is with your own despair, who is left to tell you when you're wrong? Empathy isn't just felt, it's practiced. Mirror neurons fire in response to others, rehearsing their emotions until compassion becomes instinct. But in isolation, that rehearsal ends. Over time, those neural circuits weaken. The ability to read subtle cues, to feel with others, begins to decay. Psychologists call this empathic atrophy. You stop understanding tone, misinterpret motives, grow suspicious of warmth. People become puzzles instead of presences, too complicated, too unpredictable, too close. The longer you remain detached, the more foreign humanity feels. Eventually, empathy becomes an academic concept rather than a living experience, like describing color to someone who's gone blind. If you can no longer feel others, how long before you stop believing they ever felt you? Isolation folds the mind back onto itself. Psychologists call this ruminative loop reinforcement. Thoughts repeat, fractal and infinite, until you can no longer distinguish cause from effect, desire from fear. Every memory, every imagined conversation, every failed connection folds into the next, building a labyrinth of your own construction. You begin to anticipate your own thoughts before they arrive, preempting comfort and confirming despair. The self becomes both author and audience of an endless narrative of absence, each loop reinforcing the belief that you were never meant to exist in a network of others. You are simultaneously all you have and all you lack. If the mind can only witness itself, what is left to witness it? You have traced every corridor of your own mind, peered into every corner where connection once lived, and watched it dissolve. There is no audience, no witness, no echo beyond yourself. The brain, starved of reflection, turns inward endlessly, and even the self begins to blur, folding upon its own absence. Psychologists note that chronic isolation reshapes perception, emotion, and identity. Your memories become ghosts, your desires hollow, your fears inevitable. You exist in a loop where time, empathy, and reality fracture, leaving only the raw, unfiltered awareness of absence. There is no rescue, no external hand, no final answer, only the mind staring at its own vanishing, endlessly asking, if no one else remains, do you even remain at all?